Great. Can everyone hear me? Okay, wonderful. So Jonathan Eisler, really happy to be here. This is my third Restart Network invitation. You guys invited me back, so I'm thrilled. I've had a chance to present at a couple of these, to be a panelist, and then now moderator. So I feel like it's like the trifecta, which is incredible. If there's like a punch card later, if Kylie and Susan can hook me up, free coffee is wonderful. I'm going to just very quickly introduce our research speakers, and then also the panelists, and then we'll do the research presentations, go to the panelists. But I just wanted to take a couple minutes, a couple just quick notes. I was in this same room a couple months ago as part of the policymakers panel for Calder. I think there were a couple people here who were also part of that group. We were talking a lot about teacher retention, teacher recruitment, pandemic, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. So there's a lot of kind of through to this presentation, and I think it's just really important. At a lot of these Restart Network meetings in the past, we've talked a lot, focused a lot, rightfully so, on student well-being, student wellness, student achievement, and then we were like, you know what? What about the adults, right? Like, what about the parents? What about the principals? What about the teachers, the administrators? So I'm really excited that there's a whole panel here talking about that. Obviously, we care about the students and their well-being, but you can't really have a solid environment where children can learn if you don't have the adults in as good a space as possible too. So I'm really excited to hear both of these presentations in North Carolina and Illinois. And I also want to just mention, it's really exciting to have a group of people as talented and esteemed as all these folks and accomplished. A lot of times you'll meet researchers who maybe are not that steeped in practice, and then practitioners who are maybe not as comfortable with research and data. And then if you look at the biographies of all of these folks, there's a great kind of intersection of those worlds. Like, our researchers actually acknowledge the real world and are going to talk about practice and policy and all of those things on the ground. And our practitioners in their lengthy experience, they are knowledgeable of research and data and all. So it's just this is a great space for these types of conversations. I would just kind of reiterate what Susan and Kylie said about that this intersection, these conversations are really, really important. The only other just final thing I'm going to mention before I introduce folks is I think all of us acknowledge that the pandemic didn't create a lot of problems it did create a lot of problems, right? But in terms of a lot of the things we're going to talk about, it really exacerbated and exposed a lot of the things that were kind of pre-existing, right? I think all of us acknowledge that. So it's good to kind of just reiterate that. I think throughout kind of what we're going to talk about is a lot of these things kind of existed before, but we're really kind of being able to focus more so on them now. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way. Kevin Bastian is going to be our first presenter. He is a professor at public policy from UNC Chapel Hill. He's also the director of EPIC, which is the Education Policy Initiative at Carolina. He has a lengthy resume in terms of looking at obviously teacher issues and looking at teaching assistants, as well as chronic absenteeism, recovery from COVID. Also is the co-PI on multiple projects. Research interests not only in terms of teacher and educator preparation, but also labor markets, principal effectiveness, educator preparedness. So really excited to hand it off to Kevin for the first presentation. And then we have Professor Corey Codell he's a professor of economics and public policy, University of Missouri, Columbia. He looks at the economics of education, teacher compensation, has published in multiple peer-reviewed journals, very high esteemed journals, also editor or co-editor of multiple journals. They're all listed here as well. And what I really liked about reading through his biography is he's been asked to be part of review panels at the local level, state level, federal level, nonprofit. So you're kind of like the gamut, from all the way to the micro to the macro, all the way in between. So those are our research presentations. And just really quickly, our panelists, good to see you all. We have Dr. Francisco Duran, who is the superintendent of Arlington Schools. So really excited to have him here. He is a champion of underprivileged students, of students that are from different backgrounds, and also bilingual educator. He was a middle school language arts teacher, social science teacher, social studies teacher. Has also an adjunct professor at George Mason and Howard University. So has again that both feet in the practitioner world and the research world. So very excited to have him here. We also have Dr. Christy Zalita, who is last year's Connecticut Principal of the Year, which is amazing. Congratulations. Has been in Danbury Public Schools for over 20 years. Was principal of Rogers Park Middle School for 7 years. Also has a deep commitment to equity, to positive school culture, to working with disadvantaged students, and has been in a school leadership role for many, many years. Very, very excited to have her here as well. And speaking of award winners, we also have Ralph St. Louis, who in 2024 was the Massachusetts Science Educator of the Year. And then in 2022 was the Time Magazine's Innovative Teacher Award winner. So just a lot of hardware up here. So just really excited to have him here. He's a first generation Haitian American, has over a decade of both formal and informal education research and education background, teaches biology, chemistry, multilingual science, which is amazing. STEM is also, he serves on the Coalition of Anti-Racism and Equity in Education, so which is CARE, the board. So again, just you can see everyone here has a commitment to these amazing things, diversity, equity, all these things. So just really excited to have everyone here. And I'm going to hand it off to Kevin.
Can I do the?
Yes. There you go.
All right. You can hear me well? Perfect. I'll advance forward a bit. So thank you to the Restart Network, Kylie, Susan, everyone else. Really nice to be here. This is my second one here. I've done at least one in Chicago too, so they're terrific. And I really do like how, as you said, the diverse audiences you're bringing into these forums and spaces for conversation. I'm happy to talk and be here today a little bit about our work in North Carolina, and I do a lot of work in the educator space. Today I'm actually going to stay in that space and pivot slightly, and instead of talking about teachers and school principals, is where I do a little bit more work, and actually talk about support personnel, which I would define as counselors, social workers, and school psychologists. I'm setting up a context and background. It's a little weird. I feel like I'm gonna look this way, maybe a little bit this way too. I'm setting up a context and background here that I don't think people need a lot of depth and exposure to, right? You feel it and know it. But the bold and the all caps there are important. Students and educators, right, are facing significant challenges throughout and after the pandemic. The sort of screenshot headlines from the right are just a few instances of that. Really concerned about the teaching profession, real concerned about school leaders as well. And I think at least from a research perspective, perhaps from a practice perspective, but certainly from my vantage point as a research perspective, there's less sort of attention directed towards support personnel. And of course, these are educators who are really helping schools meet whole child needs, which are likely and certainly are sort of larger and more pronounced post-pandemic. But they're also educators who can help other educators meet those needs, right? There's sort of a multiplicative effect. There's this idea that they're working with teachers and school leaders in their buildings too, right? But they're also facing challenges. So really what I'm going to share today is part one, if you will, of a two-part stuff we're working on in North Carolina. And this is really more descriptive in nature, just looking at the support personnel workforce in the state prior to and through the pandemic. So the second part of this work then will look at how this workforce, support personnel, are influencing teachers in their buildings and students in their buildings. All right, this will be somewhat small. I'm going to highlight key things as we go. First thing we want to do is just sort of look like the supply and attrition of support personnel. Again, counselors, social workers, and school psychologists. So I'm going to direct your attention to the figure at the right at the first, which is showing attrition rates. So someone's a counselor in one year, and then they're not in the next year in any school in North Carolina, or social worker, same thing. Attrition rates over time. And the biggest thing I would really like to take your attention to is for counselors, which is the darker blue bar, and for social workers, sort of the lighter blue bar, there was a real uptick between the 21-22 and 22-23 school years in attrition rates of multiple percentage points. This echoes what we saw in North Carolina for teachers and school leaders. It echoes what a lot of other states who did work in this space around teacher attrition. Again, there's not much, if any, work I've seen on support personnel attrition, but it echoes it in pattern and really in magnitude as well. And yet, if you look at the table on the left, which just shows by school year, the number of counselors, social workers, and school psychologists in North Carolina public schools, we were losing more individuals and actually having more in the workforce, right? The uptick in the number of counselors is sort of more modest and kind of moving along even similar to pre-pandemic trends. Pre-pandemic, there were still increases we were seeing in counselors. Social workers, it's much bigger. Between 2020 and 2024, the number of social workers in North Carolina increased by 27%. So pretty substantive. As you can see, we're talking about several hundred more social workers. So as you might imagine, so North Carolina certainly did, through the pandemic, lose some students. Homeschool, private school, right? Many came back. So I know that varies across the country in terms of sort of the loss of kids enrolled in public schools, but many came back. So a pretty modest loss of students. This figure here, overall at the very top, and then by some characteristics of districts, and I know it's small, is looking at ratios of support personnel, full-time support personnel per 1,000 students. And so it's looking at the pre-COVID period, so 2017 through 19, and a post period, 22 through 24. And we're looking at those 3 years in specific because those are the years when pandemic relief funding, ESSER funding, is really entering the system. And you can see that the number of counselors and social workers per 1,000 students has gone up overall, and that's probably where I draw most of our attention, particularly for social workers. I'm going to give you practically what this means is post-pandemic, there's 1.2, essentially, I'm going to round up, social workers per 1,000 students. And pre-pandemic, it was 0.88. That means social workers are able to serve 300 more students, essentially, if you think about those ratios, right? That's what that sort of means. You can see that there really hasn't been a change, however, in school psychologists. The ratios are exactly the same pre and post-pandemic, which really echoed something I didn't highlight on the previous table. The number of school psychologists in North Carolina is essentially unchanged over nearly the last decade and speaks to challenges in recruiting school psychologists in particular. The increases in counselor and social worker ratios were really pretty consistent across district contexts. So they went up by about as much in city and suburban districts as they did in rural and town districts. They went up by about as much in low poverty districts as high poverty districts. And again, the ratios there were really unchanged for school psychologists. And so, we saw the attrition was up, which is a challenge and concern given just sort of churn in the system, right? Although we were able to bring individuals in to serve in those roles in schools, hence the ratios were better, which is important. But of course, you might be thinking, why are they better? And you're thinking about those ESSER dollars I mentioned earlier, right? So we did some just basic analyses of what percentage of these support personnel had any, which is the dark blue bar, at least half, which is the light blue bar, or all, which is the gray bar, of their pay coming from pandemic relief funds, ESSER funds, essentially. And you can see here that for counselors and school psychologists, I mean, there's some meaningful percentages there, but they're also more modest relative to social workers, which, if you remember, had sort of that biggest jump, right? We've increased our social worker workforce in North Carolina by 27% over the last few years. So nearly a quarter of social workers, at least some of their pay coming from pandemic relief funds, and nearly 12% had all of their pay coming from pandemic relief funds. I'm not showing it here, but we also looked at how this differs across different types of districts. And what really sort of stood out in that is an urban-rural sort of divide. It was really urban districts in particular. And there's a few, urban district folks from North Carolina back there. It was really urban districts that were using ESSER funds predominantly for social workers, for instance. All right, so just a few concluding thoughts. Again, this is sort of just a quick summary of sort of stage 1 with a stage 2 to come. Yes, as the pandemic funds are gone, right, past tense, critical questions about what this means. I'll say now, in looking at early data from NCDPI, so the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, we've already seen reductions in support personnel in 2024-25, this school year that's about to wrap up. Several hundred counselors fewer, at least I think 100 fewer social workers. So already sort of as expected with those funds going away, having some implications. I think we're seeing that for across states and other educator roles as well. So I wanted to sort of say, from a future directions for us, again, we're going to look at what this meant for student outcomes, working conditions outcomes, which I think Corey's probably going to talk about next. We're going to think about what this means for student outcomes, attendance, achievement. But I'm interested and really sort of excited here because to have policymakers and practitioners here, because the questions I have, which are open-ended here, is what do you all think as leaders about what evidence do you need to make good staffing decisions about schools, right? And really from an educator and practitioner perspective, interested in sort of anecdotes and what have you seen support personnel doing to advance the work of other educators in your buildings? So I will stop there.
Yeah.
Can you guys all hear me if I use this? Okay, that'll be better. All right. And I'll try and keep myself on time. I have a tendency to ramble. We'll see how I do. Okay, so I'm going to talk about teacher working conditions, as Kevin alluded to. I'll just jump right into it. This is joint work with Sophia Baker, who's a PhD student with me at the University of Missouri. There I am. So I gave my slides to the Restart people, and I'm kind of a bare bones kind of guy, so I just had some text on there, and you'll see some boring pictures in a minute. They didn't like all that, so they wanted to add some photos. So I said, okay, but I get PTSD when I see this. I don't know about you guys. This was not a good time, right? The COVID pandemic was kind of a big disaster, and we had a lot of trouble. You all understand that. That's why we're all here. Working conditions are really important to teachers. They tell us that all the time. We have really good survey data on this, that this is what they really care about. And a lot of times they'll list working condition factors above other things that we spend a lot of time in the research community working about, like teacher salaries. This is all important stuff, but teachers really care about their working conditions. And with this work, we were just interested in what happened to working conditions when there was this big upheaval, and to the extent that we can look, what's been happening since. So the real contribution of this project is I think we bring really high quality data to bear on this question about teacher working conditions. The data are from the 5 Essentials survey in Illinois. I know some folks in the room are quite familiar with the survey. I'll give you the high points very quickly during my presentation. There's a lot of, I should mention also, there's a lot of details in the research that I'm not going to be able to talk about right now, so I'm just going to hit all the main stuff. I'm happy to answer questions offline and in Q&A about all the things I skip over. We have this nice data panel of schools in Illinois spanning what I think of as pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and post-pandemic years from 2016-17 to 22-23. And there's really 2 things about the 5E survey data set that I think really help us understand this working conditions question really well. The first is it's incredibly rich. The amount of information they have about teacher working conditions is really substantial. And for any folks in the room who have a understanding of the working conditions literature, a lot of times these studies of working conditions end up being, based on 4 or 5 questions they ask teachers about how they feel about their jobs and this, a few little things. This is super rich. And I'll get into that a little bit. I won't be able to go all of the weeds, but we have a ton of information about how teachers see their working conditions across many dimensions. The other thing, and what made me really think this project was going to be a go, was when I realized the depth, the great coverage of the survey and the high teacher response rate. So I will just tell you at the outset, I am a big survey skeptic. And the reason I'm a survey skeptic, whenever I see a survey, I always worry about who's not responding. Illinois put the 5E survey data set in their ESSA plan as their measure of school conditions during the 2018-19 school year. And after they did that, they gave it to virtually every school in the state. Maybe the virtually is not even needed. There's some data that are omitted for privacy reasons, but I think the coverage is excellent. The teacher response rate is excellent. This is the absolute frontier of response rates to these kind of surveys. So I feel very confident saying the results I'm going to show you apply to the majority of teachers in the workforce in Illinois. Okay, and then I'm going to go on and ramble in a minute about all kinds of things about my results and stuff, so I wanted to get the key stuff out up front. So here's the big picture of what we found. Teacher working conditions were trending positively going into the pandemic. They declined with the onset of the pandemic, and then they declined at a faster rate in the post-pandemic period. And I'll just tell you, that part surprised me. What I was expecting was a decline and partial rebound, but that's not what we see. I'll show you that in a minute. There's a bunch of different indicators on the survey. Most of them declined. The ones that didn't decline did not meaningfully improve. They just kind of stayed flat. Largest declines were in the areas of classroom disruptions, quality of student discussions, expectations for post-secondary education, this thing called teacher innovation, which I kind of give parenthetical what that means. I think it's really important, actually, based on what teachers say in other research they really care about in terms of their working conditions. And there's also a concerning trend in teacher safety. So a lot of big areas that teachers care a lot about. Okay, the coverage of the survey is excellent. Illinois put in their ESSA plan. So that means all the schools participated. There's also a really high response rate of teachers within the schools, which is equally important. We want to build a trend going into the pandemic so we can see if the pandemic shocked the trend. An issue is prior to that ESSA rule, not all the districts and schools in Illinois took the survey. A fair number did. We have to do some statistical things to try to connect the pre-pandemic data to the post-pandemic data. I'm not going to be able to talk about that here. It's all in the paper. I think we can do that pretty effectively. And then the last thing, the survey was not administered during the 2019-20 school year. That's when the pandemic hit, and it hit during the survey window, so I think they just closed it down. Okay. Oops. Okay. The 5E survey data set measures teacher working conditions very deeply. There's 105 different questions. They group them into 20 domains. The word for a domain on the survey is a measure. I'm not going to have a lot of time to go into the weeds all these things, but it's just, there's a ton of information that teachers are giving these survey developers, administrators, about their working conditions. The Chicago Consortium developed and administers the survey. The bottom numbers there on the slide, I'm not going to have time to talk about. That's just documenting the great coverage of the survey. You'll just have to take my word for it. For now, we can look later at the details. So here's a visualization of the results. This is one way to visualize the results. There's a few different ways to look at it. What I have here is a graph, and each light gray line there is an individual teacher working condition. There's measure of working conditions. There's 20 of those. And the solid bolded line there is the average over the 20 measures. The horizontal axis is years. So we start with the 2016-17 school year, go through 22-23. 2019 was the last year of the survey before the pandemic. We normalized that to 0. So the big picture I want you to see from this is this like slightly upward or flat trend going into the pandemic, depending on where you want to start, and then the decline when the pandemic hit, and then after the pandemic, the continued decline. The vertical axis is in points. It's a little hard to convey all this information in the short amount of time I have to talk. I'll just, for those of you that are used to thinking about these things, the working conditions are standardized, so they're so that 20 points is one standard deviation. So that's about moving from the 50th to 85th percentile. So that black line dropped about 7 points from 2019 to 2023. So that's about a third of a standard deviation, a little more than that. So that's a pretty substantial thing. I'll show you some individual numbers on working conditions in a second. 2 lines that I think are really interesting in this picture. The first is this one that the bottom falls out of it. You can see everything kind of ends up lower. There's one that ends up way down there by itself. That's classroom disruptions, and everything's positively coded. So everything's negative is bad news. So teachers are telling us that their classrooms are highly disrupted since the pandemic. There's one working condition that does great in the worst year, what I will call the worst year. That was 2020-21, the most disrupted school year. I think we can all agree. I'll give you 1 second to think about what that working condition is that was doing great during the worst period of the pandemic. Once I tell you, it'll be obvious. It was teacher safety, because all the teachers were at home. It's very safe at home. Once that was over and the teachers went back, safety dropped off, and in fact is worse today than it was before the pandemic by a substantial margin. If you are more of a numbers person, here's all the numbers that are under that picture. These are all 20 of the individual working condition measures. They're all on this list here. It's a little bit overwhelming to look at. I've got a little Christmas theme going. Red is bad, green is good. From 2019 to 2023, that first column, that's like from right before the pandemic to the most recent data we have, at least in our study. There may be a new year of data released by now. You just see it's overall a sea of red. So this is just the evidence that the pandemic really there was a big decline in teacher working conditions during the pandemic. If you want to see things broken out in smaller intervals, we've got on the right 3 columns there, we've got the pre-pandemic period, what we're calling the pre-pandemic, 2017 to 2019. 2019 to 2021, that end-year survey was during that really bad year, which I was expecting to be the low point. And then 21 to 23 is what I'm calling post-pandemic, with the caveat, going back to the slides at the beginning about what to call that period is not exactly clear. But what you should be seeing is the big shift from green to red. So this is just what happened. Okay. Subgroup trends. We do a lot of stuff in the paper. I'm not going to get bogged down in it. The big picture I'm going to tell you is the trends are surprisingly robust across all different cuts of the data. The drops in working conditions were similar in high SES schools and low SES schools, inside Chicago, outside Chicago. Chicago, the drops were bigger, but the trends were very similar. One other notable thing, schools and districts that spent more time in online learning had much larger drops in teacher working conditions than schools and districts that got back to in-person faster. This is a good place for me to remind you, this is not a causal analysis, it's descriptive. It may be that being online would directly cause these working condition drops to be so bad. It may be that other stuff correlated with the inability to get back in person is also correlated with teacher working conditions declining. So I'll just conclude by saying I think to me this evidence is really disturbing. It's like a 5-alarm fire. If that's a lot of alarms? I think that's a lot of alarms. I think not only it's really bad for teachers, but I think the teachers are telling something. We've made some mistakes in the schools, and we made some mistakes in how we've come back. And so I think it's a big concern. I expect researchers are going to spend a lot of time trying to study this, disentangle the causal factors, figure out this, figure out that. I actually don't think policymakers and education officials have time to wait around for us researchers to do our postmortem on this. So I'm sure these esteemed folks are going to tell us all what to do about this. But I think we should be really worried about it. And that's the punchline. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. A lot of food for thought, and we're going to have plenty of time for the audience to weigh in as well. But I'd like to turn to the panel first. And my first question, and I'm just going to go down the line. So we'll do Christy and then Ralph and then Francisco. The first question I have, and it could be either or, so feel free to respond to both presentations, is from your own personal experience and background, what from these presentations kind of resonated with you, and then what were things that surprised you in terms of some of the results? So again, we'll start with Christy, and then we'll go down the line.
Sure. Kind of looking at them together and thinking about what he just talked about with the decline in, when we're coming back, the one that dropped the most, and thinking about how the ESSER funding spent on support staff. I was an urban underfunded district who used ESSER to buy desks. We did not use it to buy, and I say that very, I don't like the word, but we didn't use it to buy any human capital. We couldn't, because that ESSER funding kept us flush. And we had a $30 million cliff. And so when I was able in October to speak with people from the Department of Education, it was around, well, the ESSER funding kept a lot of us flush. Might you consider that that was a needed ESSER funding? And it wasn't really extra. It's kind of like that Title I funding that's supposed to be supplemental, not supplanting, of that oftentimes supplants for districts like mine. But that I'm not surprised by that, because the amazing support staff that we haven't grown in number. We gained students. We've lost like 100 students now, not just from many different reasons, but the things that our folks are dealing with when the kids came back. If we had 10 more people, the trauma that the children have gone through is at a different level than was just, oh, well, what are you going to pick next year for your classes? Oh, you guys aren't getting along together. No, it's more like, hey, my parents have no jobs. ICE is knocking on my door. Why are there people rioting? Like we met with kids online to play Among Us, which I forgot how to play, but the kids were nervous because people were protesting outside and like, but what if they come from my family? This is what, I'm middle school, these are 11 to 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds. They should never have to think about that. It's not what I thought about when I was that age. And so the idea of we don't have enough to begin with, the problems that the kids have now are higher, and we don't see it in our budgets to be hiring any more people. So I resonate with it, I get it, and I hope that you have a solution, but I think it's with dollar bills, and it's coming from outside of, the smaller picture.
Sure. Thank you for your presentation. And I really echo everything that I heard. That is exactly what I see in my school community. I'm from Lowell Public Schools in Massachusetts. We are a Title I district. I teach at the high school. We have roughly 3,500 students, 70 different languages. The challenges that are reflected here in the working conditions of educators are exactly what my day-to-day is, and it's sad to hear. And to put like a data point on it, how much our students are struggling, I constantly think about our homeless student population in our school district. It has quite literally doubled since pre-pandemic. Our students have experienced deep trauma. As they are returning to schools, their routines, their structures are deregulated. And this is why we are seeing the influence and impact on teachers' working conditions. And I'm sure everyone in this room is very well aware of that. I would say that I am very lucky to be in Massachusetts in particular, as we have a funding structure that is actually trying to address this. In 2019, we passed the Student Opportunity Act, which adapted our foundation budget to increase it by about $1.5 billion over 7 years. And this is the seventh year of that. I've seen increase of staff, support staff in our schools that have truly helped my students. Like almost, and it's really sad to say actually, almost every day I see a student who is in deep need of help, and I am pulling them to the side to say like, what can I do for you? Can I have you talk to someone right now? Because you putting your head down in my room crying, not wanting to engage with others is not going to help you, or it's not going to help me, and it's not what we need right now. So I am deeply thankful for those social workers, guidance counselors, school psychologists, but we just need to do more. And until we help our students, and we are not going to be able to truly help our educators in the classroom.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. A couple of things, was a lot of things actually that got into my mind thinking about this, but one, I'll start with the first one, thinking about our counselors and support staff. And it actually is connected, I believe, to the working conditions piece when we think about the pressure and the amount of responsibilities that were put on schools during COVID was a lot, from the superintendency down, and I never thought I was going to be a decision maker about when to open schools, when to wear masks, and this and that and the other, but we had to become health experts and whatnot. Our teachers were doing so much as well. We all understood, though, that we were in a point of crisis, and we were doing what we could to survive. Then we quickly came, and was almost, in some places it was very quick, in others it was a little slower, back into person, with the opportunities and understanding that there was a lot of new challenges, whether they were behavioral, mental health, or instructional challenges, and it was all put on schools. And so for me, I think the challenge of the money being taken away from the counseling, psychologists, the working conditions is right now there's two, and I would love to see some more research and conversation about how do we as a community take responsibility for some of the needs that are happening to our students and our families, because it's all now been put on schools, and we will do everything that we can. That's the thing about educators. We do, because we care, and that's what we're all about. And people, I think, sometimes take advantage of that. And to a certain point, now that has taken effect on working conditions for teachers, who, out of good intention, I think there were some things put in place. For example, here in Virginia, we saw a great need around literacy, and it was just, again, the pandemic brought to our attention the real disparities in what we saw. And so working with our General Assembly, at the time I was on the State Board of Education, and our governor, we worked together bipartisan. We had passed a bill called the Virginia Literacy Act that's put in some really positive efforts and resources into changing to the science of reading. Well, that's great and well-intended, but again, putting that all back on schools and all on teachers in such a quick way because of a sense of urgency that we had. And I think this is the part that's a push and pull in education. We have a sense of urgency, we see data, we want to act, and or again, we're expected to act in certain ways for challenges to be addressed, and we're not mindful of the actual practitioner the teacher, which the research tells us is the number one driving factor for success. We do a lot to them without doing it with them, without getting their voice into the conversation. And sometimes, again, during the pandemic, people understood they were just, people understood, they were listening to what we had to do. They're moving along. Teachers got that. They understood that. They wanted themselves to be safe. They wanted their students to be safe, healthy-wise. But now that we're back into a space where we're trying to recreate and in some cases reimagine, because one thing that I see as an opportunity from the pandemic is that we're not doing the same things we've always done. It's forcing us to have to change some instructional practices or mental health or student well-being and staff well-being. So it's a long answer to say, and I can go on and on and on about this, but I do think that what both of those studies shared with me is just the need for us to really dig deeper and have real conversations and not be afraid to talk about the fact that education needs the community to help us through these challenges and these works, because we're not going to keep recruiting or retaining teachers when we keep putting and putting and putting and putting on top of their plate to the point that there's just nothing left. And thinking that teachers care and they're going to do whatever they want to do, that might have been fine and dandy years ago. And I think our culture and our environment has changed a lot, because now people understand after the pandemic that they have to take care of themselves too. And people realize that their own mental health and their own challenges were really put into a different space and a place. All of us had our own way of dealing with that, I'm sure. Speak for myself, we all had a different way of having to understand our own mental health. We were faced with that, whether it was just physically being, locked in a house or whatnot. And now we have to address that in a different way with our staff. And I don't see us doing that holistically as a system. Individuals we are, teachers, principals are doing that case by case, but as a community, those of you that are policymakers, those of you that are supporting us at the universities, those of us that are supporting through funding, those of us that are community leaders, that's, I think, the missing piece, is just shifting and assuming we're going to get back to normal and it's going to be all on the schools to accomplish it. Well, these working conditions are showing why that's not plausible or effective long term.
Thank you to the panelists. And before we go to the next question, I wanted to just make sure, Corey and Kevin, if you have any comments in response to any of those comments, please feel free to jump in.
I just wanted to push on you guys a little bit more in a particular way. So I just wanted to, because when I'm listening to you guys talk, I'm thinking about, these terrible things you guys are talking about and this, these big problems. And we're just a panel of problems, right? Not solutions. But so what strikes me is we've never spent more money on education. We've never had more adults per student in the building. It's been going up for forever. The community, I was very sympathetic to your point, like, we as a community need to worry about this, not just schools, but what can schools do if there's not a dump truck of money coming around the corner? I mean, what's an actionable thing that we can do without requiring someone else to give us a bunch of money or someone to come in and fix our communities that we don't know how to do that? What can we do?
Well, do you want to start, Christine? Go ahead.
As a person who did that, I look at, I was not surprised by that it dropped faster post-pandemic. We were talking about the 11th graders this year. They were feral when they came back. And we were a district who was out, felt like forever. When we came back we were hybrid. And we had 1,100 kids. We had about 200 in the building on any given day. And so they forgot how to be human. And so what we did, sitting online, playing Among Us with the 20 kids that showed up. But when we came back, we had bigger conversations as educators about, well, how are we going to welcome them back into the school? And we became our own community, and we've changed what we expect. And we expect you to let's talk to each other. Let's look at each other. Put the computers away. I do not push. Technology is awesome and great. They know how to use it. They know how to do this. I need them to know how to do this and to think. And so when they came back, we're like, you don't need to get on the computer. Yeah, they can type, but don't write the essay, talk. And so we changed how we taught so that we were getting away from all the computer work and we were getting back to the human work. Because at the end of it, we have to be able to communicate. As we've gone through it, we saw, it almost broke us. And I hope that the 11th graders have gotten the help that they needed, because they had it the worst. And we had teachers please just stay one more, I'm staying too. If you stay, I'll stay. And we've come around it, and we are in such a better place. There is hope out there, and we weren't getting any money. And we have made a difference for kids. And we've changed even something as simple as our intervention block. It is a project-based learning block, and it's focused on passion project. It's focused on looking around in the community. How do we make our community better? How then it's not the teacher led, the students decide what they're going to do. And so we've empowered them to be leaders and to understand that they can make changes and they can be better than what came before them. And that's been our way of addressing it, is to come back to the human part of it and have conversations and work with that collective efficacy to change for the better.
Just pigging back on Christy's comments, when we returned to school, I was very big on no more computers, no more screens, no more nothing. We're going to engage in deep, meaningful discourse, conversations. We're going to be human again, and that's something that I've deeply appreciated since till now. That our students have. Like, I don't want to say fully recovered, but this year in particular, I have a lot of hope. I'm actually curious about the data that would be reflective of this year in terms of working conditions, because I think things have gotten better this year in particular, and next year I expect more growth. In addition to the community point, I think all schools should deeply leverage the community schools model. My district has so many partnerships with people who support our students, from clinicians coming in for doctor's appointments to optometrists to mentors, like just so many resources to the point where right now my passion project in my school, not as if I have many other things to do, is compiling our entire vast network of community partners. I'm working with our district to make sure that all of our schools have access to a comprehensive list and contacts, descriptions, that make sure that every adult in the school knows what is available for our students, and we are creating a family, student-friendly version of it so that our students have access. Because to the point of the optometrist, I have so many students who have lost their glasses or have broken their glasses and don't say anything until halfway through the year, and then they're like, "Oh, it's $200-300 for glasses," and I'm like, the glasses bus comes every 2 weeks. You could have said something. And I don't know how many other adults in the building know that, versus it was new news to me. So we need to make sure that everyone is on the same page what our students have access to.
On a different point, I think that one thing the data shows, and I saw a couple of studies, just having more positions and having more money is not going to help, right? And this is the case. What we have to do, and I'll take one example of all the counselors that were added. There was a study I saw that the correlation to then chronic absenteeism did not go down, and they did some deeper interviews with some of those counselors, and they said, "But when I was hired, I wasn't told to focus on chronic absenteeism. I was told to just meet with more students." So, and for example, in a couple of districts, they didn't give any directions what to do. They just got more counselors. So I think one thing we can and should do is be better fiscal stewards of our monies that we're getting, and being very, as the superintendent now, I'm talking with leaders, so that we are very, very intentional. So in my district, what we've done is we've put together attendance teams. We put forth data that we're sharing with the community, with our parents, with our teachers about chronic absenteeism. We're making sure that our staff that are focused on that are trained in that. We bring them together quarterly, attendance summits, stuff we didn't do before the pandemic. Where we're really trying to be focused and intentional about what are the needs, what is the data telling us, and then how are we applying those resources accordingly. So I think, yes, but at the same time, I still think it's our job to be advocates for our schools and our staff, because that's one thing I heard. Another thing that I've done since the pandemic, I started a monthly listen and learn chat where I just sit down and hear from teachers what they're feeling, what they're going through, what are some ideas. And one thing they share with me every month is really not feeling respected or heard or listened to by the community, by others, et cetera. And so using our voice as leaders to be strong about that, I think, is an important piece. The third thing is, I really do think that we have to be, as school system leaders, and as leadership, whether it's at the school base or the division level. So Virginia, we call them divisions, not districts, sorry. At the division level, we have to really be thoughtful about what we're putting on our teachers' plates and being intentional about it. And everything cannot be done at the same time. There has to be items that you focus on each year and every year. And so it's a multi-approach to what needs to be done to address the working conditions piece. And I don't think we can just ask for more money and say that it's going to change something, because it did not and it never does. And so that's why I appreciated your second question on the first presentation of what were the outcomes connected to this. And so that, I think, is very important data for us to see. If there are no outcomes, why weren't there no outcomes? And again, the one study I saw, I think was from Harvard, that showed that connection to why chronic absenteeism did not improve when there were more counselors added, and yet they weren't told to focus on it. I mean, so it's something that's simple, but it's not that simple in terms of how it actually plays out.
All right, thank you so much for the follow-up. My next question, and maybe we'll go in reverse order. We'll start with Francisco and then go to Ralph and Christy. In terms of research on not only the disruptions, but also, teacher culture of teachers and kind of support for teachers, what are some of the research questions that you all in your roles should be asked? Maybe they're not being asked right now, but what are some of the research questions or just research strands that you think would be very helpful kind of in an applied way that could help improve your respective abilities to, improve teacher culture, improve retention, all of those things? And again, I know that's a pretty specific question, but if you can think of ways, research strands maybe, or research questions that might be helpful.
I do think, again, what I was saying, the last question, some accountability questions around what are the practices that are beneficial to outcomes in an accountability frame that are also supportive of teachers. Because I think accountability can be used, in a stick or actually a supportive way. So I would love to see more in that area. Two, I think another strand is the whole piece around our well-being and mental health of our students and our staff. And what are some of the ways that we can put in systems of support for our students and also for our staff? And I think those will look very different in terms of well-being and mental health and overall support there. And then the third one is one that we've been trying to work on for many years, and in my working at Howard University and George Mason, is really looking at what are the best practices for supporting instructional gains for students. How do we work on continuing to think about strategies and resources for a very differentiated population of students that teachers face each and every day? And that's changing and getting more differentiated over time. So I think instructional, mental health, and student health overall, and then some real accountability, honest feedback about outcomes-driven practices that show where our resources, our dollars, and our efforts. Because I do think and I'm speaking very, very from a superintendent or district level, we need that kind of research and data to be able to advocate for policymakers to show what are the ways that they can invest in best practices for budget purposes. Time and money is two of the things that we don't have. And so when we go to our respective capitals, Richmond or DC, we need that research to show that when we do certain things, and even perhaps having the recommendations coming from the research to show what are those things that can be put in place that are going to, if you fund them, really show positive outcomes. And I know that would be really positive one in an accountability way. But there's so much unknown right now, I think, with regards to the mental health and the well-being component of our staff and our students, that from a research perspective of what can be done to support them. And then the instructional one is something I just think we need to continue to dig deeper into and find more ways to support our differentiated students.
Thank you, Francisco. I'd first start off by echoing the mental health and well-being. Coincidentally, I just finished running a professional development series where the last session we had was focused on school staff mental health and well-being. Quite specifically, we got a licensed grief counselor to come to our session and guide us through some exercises and practices. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see the feedback from that session was the strongest. It's what the 40, 50 participants said that they really walked away with a skill set that is going to help them, and they want to continue that. So I highly encourage that avenue of research. And another coincidence, I am currently working on my dissertation on this topic itself. So those researchers in the room, no stealing. But
Plant that question.
I am very curious about teacher retention at the early career, mid-career, and veteran status. I don't think there, in particular, is enough research in that mid-career range. But as we speak to early career, I think that schools, researchers need to invest in what the induction, mentoring, support system for those new teachers, because we know that 1 in 5, 1 in 4 teachers don't last 3 years. So we need to make sure that those early teachers are supported. There is a line of literature around comprehensive induction and mentorship programs that have really shown great added value when you add consistent coaching models, support, time away from like actual. Don't tell me to meet with my mentor teacher and teach at the same time. Give us time and space to do that work around the early career moment. And specifically the mid-career, and this is kind of where my focus in research is diving a bit more deeply, is my school district does something quite special. We have a partnership with two universities that are supporting our what we call the Teacher Leadership Academy, which is specifically giving school teachers like professional development opportunities, credentialing, certifications, pay step increases, leadership opportunities, these things that really will support and nurture those teacher leaders in your community who want to do more and contribute more and find their own space. So we have to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the diverse needs of the teachers that are in front of us, whether they may be a new teacher or a mid-career teacher. And veteran teachers, thank you for your service. You do whatever you want.
So I love what they said, and I would add to it, doing research like, can we do school differently? And it's not that novel of an idea, but like I think it was Ken Robbins, it was a million years ago, and it was like, oh, we put kids on this conveyor belt. Now you're in first grade, now you're in second grade, and it's all age-based. So what, who cares? I have some 6th graders now who are testing on a 10th grade math level. And I'm trying to figure out a way to when algebra is given at 8th grade now, can I get them into that class? Because they need to be challenged. And so research around how do we change it up? And I'm willing to be a test school. I'll change it up. We've tried to do that with our PBL, but I think that idea, we keep trying to do the same things in like a different form, and it's not working. They're still struggling to read. They're still really struggling to do math. And we're trying to change it up. Even we have a double block math for some students, and instead it's not drill and kill that second, it's, hey, we're gonna fly a kite, like build the kite. I'm not telling you how, figure it out. Now you're gonna have to understand how important triangles are, and what triangles are, and what an angle is. And so trying to get that back to that application of knowledge. And so I would love research around how to do school differently, because it ain't working that well.
Can I piggyback on that?
Sorry.
I'll snag this. In the research in terms of how to do school differently, one thing I would encourage us all to look into, I think it's called the John Williams High School in Aurora, Colorado. They are a PBL-based high school that our school had the opportunity to visit. And when I tell you they looked exactly like my students, so I felt like this is what would be successful. The students there were taking an algebra class that was themed in the American Ninja Warrior, where they had to record, they were recording their angle jumps and putting geometry into it and algebra into it. I was just quite impressed. And what was really most impressive for me was that school that was known as the last opportunity for the students in that school community was excelling beyond the entire district. Doing something different is better, can be better if done right. And then lastly, I'd say also look into the portrait of a graduate model. I hope anyone ever heard of Portrait of a Graduate? Oh, hallelujah. Okay. It has made significant leaps and bounds in the consistency of messaging across my school district and clarifying what do we really need to really re-envision what education looks like for our students. So I would just look into the Portrait of a Graduate.
I have one more too I'd like to add. One that I think is very important, a very pressing issue that we all know, I'm sure, is the teacher shortage and hiring quality teachers. And there are so many new alternative teacher preparation programs that are coming up. I mean, I see constantly different ways. Would love to see research on effective components of what needs to be put in place for an alternative pathway towards teacher certification, and what are some ways that we're seeing those, which programs are more effective, which ones are we seeing more retention, which ones are we seeing more student support happening in terms of instruction, et cetera. Because, you know, sometimes we get them, they come meet with us all the time, and we do this, and they're very, very different, and we don't know yet which one is going to be the most effective at seeing. And again, it's not just about getting bodies in our classrooms, because they can all do that. It's about which ones are having the most outcome for our students, and also retention over time as well.
And I wanted to just give Kevin and Corey an opportunity if you wanted to respond to many of these points. So,
First off, thank you all. I think the two things this makes me think of a little bit is, you know, I think probably Corey might agree with this too from himself. We sort of bring a unique vantage point of someone, or researchers who often use statewide administrative data or large data sets to answer, you know, use quantitative methods to answer questions. I want to note, obviously, the limitations with those data, and some of those limitations have to do with measures that aren't in those data, and important measures you're talking about, like well-being and, you know, mental health. And I think I would want to highlight a couple other things that your comments suggest, right, or implicate, and that is the real importance of continued partnerships. And that's part of what, you know, we're here about, partnerships, so we can, researchers in the research community can hear some of these questions, because I think one of the hardest parts about doing research well is actually knowing what question is the right question to ask, because you can answer a lot of questions. It's what's the most salient question. So I think that's really important. And I think this highlights the partnership piece around data, right? So many of the things you're mentioning are things that could be studied with district or statewide administrative data, but you have to know where to look. And so just that ongoing communication is essential to sort of know those questions and know where to look and what to look at. So that's what I would highlight, and I appreciate from taking from this.
I guess I'll just make a quick observation that doesn't require a response, and we can go to the next question. But it just strikes me that, Francisco, you started out talking about how we need the community to do more and schools are being asked to do too much. And then when you guys expanded on what you wanted, like, I'm thinking the first thing a school should do is teach kids how to read and do math. But you're talking about, you know, social, emotional well-being and mental health and what's going on at home with screens and getting eyeglasses for kids. And it just strikes me that the schools do just try to do everything, and I know the numbers on the budgets really well. They don't have the budget for it, so it's like there's a big problem.
it does seem kind of contradictory, right? Yeah, no, that's great observation. One more question for the panel and the researchers, and then we'll open it up to larger discussion. And actually, I'm going to start with Kevin and Corey on this one. And it was kind of my thought about this was prompted by some of the icebreaker that Kylie had come up with. So this is a disruption. It's a huge disruption. Hopefully, we never in our lifetimes have to deal with another pandemic. But I think we're all aware that there are going to be other disruptions, right? Whether it's localized, because of climate change or hurricanes or whatever. So I guess the question that I have is for all of you, what are things that we have learned, very top level kind of things that we've learned in a good way from this disruption and our collective response to it, that we, even though we don't want disruptions to occur, we know they're going to happen. So what are some things that we've learned that would be maybe applicable or transferable to other future disruptions, the best practices, right? What are some best practices we've learned, and so that we can, better respond or recover from future possible disruptions? So.
I can go back to.
Okay. I think I can be very fast, so I'll just say I don't think we learned much. This all went terrible, and we're doing terrible. We should all be aware, acknowledge the truth. I will say the thing that I think some people learned that maybe I'm surprised we had to learn is that online learning doesn't work very well, and in-person learning is really important. And I think maybe we shockingly kind of undervalued the importance of in-person learning. And I also think with all the tech, those of you that work in this space and talk to the tech people, they've always got their new great idea that is going to make tech work in education better. Right now, what works best in education is a teacher working with students without electronics. And I think the pandemic reinforced that.
It's okay. I think that I feel really good about my climate and culture right now in my school, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done as a community. And I think it goes back to one word: relationships. And if you have not established a relationship at this point in time that's built on trust and humility, start there and don't ever stop. Because that I really sincerely, in reflecting on and thinking about what are the things that we did, well, I have a relationship with folks, not because I taught with some of them for 10 years when I was a teacher in this school, but because I went out and I sat down and I actively listened. I didn't try to answer the question before they answered. They finished asking it. I have an open door policy. They make fun of me because I'll be like this with my 52 screens and I'm like, hi. And they will, because I stop and I listen. And then I get feedback from people. And I don't just get it to say, oh, I checked that box. I don't do BCBS, box checking. You can fill in B and S. I say, like, all right, 4 things every end of the year. And I started this coming into it as the new principal with our team. What went well this year? Like, tell me. And I'm typing what didn't work. And I'm typing what is the thing, like the protocol procedure, what would you change? What would you add? What would you delete? I take it in. And then what's one thing we can continue to do to build our climate and keep it positive? And then I take it all. And I used to code it using my skills from my dissertation, but now the AI is wonderful. And I put it in there and it does the work because it saves me time. And then I share it out with people and say, no, this is what y'all said. So when we're going to do this next year, this is why we're doing it. Oh, and yeah, by the way, I want to change the schedule. And then we have meetings. And I'm not going to do something to a group of teachers that, one, I wouldn't do myself. I sometimes say, like, you got to clean the toilets. Somebody got to clean the toilets. I'm not going to ask you to clean the toilet if I won't clean the toilet. And you will see me in there when I haven't had to clean the toilet. However, I have helped clean up a mess because somebody got a bloody nose, or I've helped, got how many people out in the cafeteria? Yeah, here, I'll hand it out. Being willing to do whatever you're asking of others and go back to relationship, build on a foundation of trust. I think that's the thing that brought us back from the brink of insanity, and it is still bad. It is, but we look at it like, all right, what are we doing this year? You know what? We're going to double our math growth because we're going to try something different. We're not telling Central about it because we know it's going to work, and then if it doesn't, whatever. But it has, and we doubled. We had 10 percentage point growth and 9.6 in our high needs population because we grouped kids and strategically, and then we moved them around, and it works, and it's not tracking, and it's not like these things that have been, that it's not what it used to be. And so build trust and relationships.
I couldn't agree more. And in the sense of those are what really influence the working conditions of educators, trust relationships. Something that I was wondering as an indicator wasn't present in the 5 essentials was like shared decision making, shared leadership. You need to have relationships. You need to have trust to impart that shared leadership amongst the entire team, amongst the entire school. In terms of like working conditions of educators, ensuring that everyone has a voice, is heard, and is actually responded to, as Christy said, is what will ensure that we can mitigate as much as we can of the loss of teachers from the profession. Just extra context.
I'll piggyback on that because I definitely agree that having teacher voice and teacher ownership is really important lesson from this time that we're in. In my district, since the pandemic, we now in our collective bargaining agreement, our last contract that we approved, we added in that for every common planning time or department meeting, the teachers develop the agenda. And it's driven by them. That was a huge thing for them, and it's made a big difference for their voice. Another thing that I think is really important lesson I've learned is the importance, and we talked about it a lot today, the importance of prioritizing wellness and flexibility as we're working through some of the challenges, what those are. And then the third thing is really just strong systems of support that are very intentional, that are grounded in data, whether it's for chronic absenteeism, as I mentioned, whether it's for mentoring that you talked about for new teachers coming on board, or whether it's an instructional approach that we're doing, that we're very, very, very focused, strategic, and intentional about supporting with all the resources that we have at the school level, at the division level, wherever it may be. Not that we didn't do that before, we tried to, but I think now even more focused on doing that are the three things that I would mention.
Quickly, I want to note just a few interesting things. One, maybe one thing I hope we've learned and continue to learn is like there's just no one single solution, with the exception that I think Christy and Corey may have actually given a very similar answer, because what you really, I think, talked about is why in-person instruction works so much better, has something to do with the relationships, right? So that's central, and yet, from a policy or programs or tutoring or, different things, summer programs, different things we might bring to bear, there's no one sort of silver bullet, right? Like, I think we need to think comprehensively, try to think holistically, think that multiple things may be needed. And then I think the last thing I would sort of say is, and this is something we've talked about, I think, a little bit in North Carolina and throughout sort of this restart work a bit is, and maybe even touches on what you mentioned about accountability a bit too, is being really intentional early on and thoughtful early on about thinking about what success looks like. The examples we have with our partners in North Carolina is, what does success look like for a summer school extension program that's trying to promote academic recovery? But if it's a 2-week program and it's actually reducing chronic absenteeism, that's really good. Maybe that is the success story. Students feel more engaged, but yeah, it's not impacting test scores. So that's a small example. I think a bigger example is just a template to think of is, as we think about policies and programs, really being intentional at the outset of what we mean by success and being able to have data to really look at that well.
Thank you, everyone. And Kylie, I have a quick question. Did you want us to jump to the last slide for the group, or do we want to open it up to?
We're going to open it up to
Sure,
questions.
sounds great.
Yeah, audience questions. All right. Start over here. Here you go, Dr. Kelly.
I know this is unfair of me when you ask a question that you probably already know the answer. So I have a two-parter, but for our panelists, I'm curious to know the number of years that you were in your district during this pre-post pandemic, and then I'll follow up with my question or my point.
I started in the pandemic, started June 2020 in my district.
Okay.
I came into the pandemic.
And you're still there. Okay. You see where I'm going with this.
I'd consider myself actually a more new teacher, so I actually started 2018. Yeah.
Okay. And you're still with the same district.
Yep, same class.
Okay.
I started in 2003, and I became the principal of the of the school in 2018. So I was there through there, and still there now.
So my question, my comment, what does Chicago Public Schools, what does Cincinnati Public Schools, what does Highline Public Schools, I can go on and on and on. What do they all have in common? Superintendents, systems leaders that were showing growth in their student data that did not make it through a very disruptive time of making those decisions. Do you keep masks on? Do you bring kids back? You have people running for the boards of education specifically to put in policies that were their own personal decisions. Leadership matters. Leadership matters. There are a lot of leaders, whether it's at the systems level or the school level, that are qualified to be in that role, but the number of years that they've had getting to that seat where they're sitting right now is very different today than it was like way back when. So I guess my question is, I was in a district in Illinois, by the way, I left 5E, where I would love to take, pride in some of those, green numbers. But what happened 2020, 2021, there are a lot of us that are not still seated in those roles based on the decisions that we made that were for the best interests of what we knew at that particular time. And I do wonder, for individuals that our whole, like what we do is set the supporting conditions, how that disruption in leadership might impact, the teachers' perceptions of their working conditions. So that's my first question, just wondering. And then just like Education Reimagined for the researcher in terms of like reimagining education. That's it.
I can comment on this, as I feel as though these past few years have been deeply challenging since the change of leadership within my school community. Since I've started in literally 2018, I've had 4 principals, 3 different superintendents, and changing supervisors. I don't think that is healthy for any organization to have that much change. I was commenting this earlier. Continuity of services for both the staff and the students is very important to maintain a healthy environment. And when you bring new people in, yes, they can bring great new ideas and a new way of thinking, but not often enough. We take time to understand how the original system operates and how you navigate through it. So, yeah, that is my experience. And I actually don't think I answered. Did I answer your question there outside of yes, I agree? Okay.
So I agree as well. In Northern Virginia, there are 7 school systems, and as of June 30th, I'll be the only superintendent that's been here since the pandemic of the 7. So it has been a challenge, and I think a lot of it is part of why Corey and others were commenting on the fact I opened up with the community piece, because it is a big component of the work in being a superintendent is working with the community and having that strong support. And I'm fortunate here in Arlington that we do have a very strong supportive community who has been supportive of the work we're trying to do and understand that. Also the politics that is involved with regards to not only local but national and or state. In some of those states that you mentioned, there has been some change at the state level. Certainly we've had national changes going on, and those all impact as well what's happening at the school board level. My dissertation that I did 11 years ago was looking at how and why superintendents lasted beyond their first year and what were the factors. And I studied 5 superintendents, 3 who made it past their first year and 2 did not. This was before the pandemic. But I think there was some lessons learned from that, which was with regards to board relations, community relations, having the political skills that are needed to navigate very challenging times. And at that time, it was not as challenging as it was now, thinking back when I first started my study in late 2000s. So I think all of those factors go into play, and I think it's something that is, to a teacher, to a principal, obviously that's where the work is happening. But when we are changing at the top and changing things and bringing in new programs, that is disrupting. And that is, like a ping pong ball sometimes back and forth. But it is part of the work that I think, and maybe that's another research piece to go deeper into, is really trying to understand what are those conditions that can help influence school boards on how to support and be mindful of the role of the superintendent. Principal-wise, too, there's been a lot of turnover and some principals across the nation. So I don't know if I answered your question either. I'm just more agreeing with you and having experienced and lived it. And starting in the pandemic in the middle on June 1st, 2020, it was very challenging because I didn't get a chance to even meet and build relationships with people. I didn't meet most of the people I worked with for a year physically. I didn't even meet 2 board members that were my bosses until 7-8 months. Even the interview process was all virtual. So that's always a challenge piece. And I think at the end of the day, what Christy and Ralph both talked about is the relationship piece is the most important part. And so the other challenging thing I'll say for most of my colleagues that I've talked to is while we are engaged and we're engaged with a lot of challenging political decisions, we weren't able to develop those relationships with our leaders and our teachers in the best way that we could, or with our community in the best way we could, because we were very focused on some of that may have been another factor that hopefully is changing now. But it's a big challenge and a problem for sure.
Thank you for your feedback, and I really appreciate your insight around mental health awareness for our educators and our students. I'm Dr. Brittany Hazard. I'm a district administrator in Delaware, and my background, I'm also a mental health professional, so I get to kind of have the best of both worlds. My question for you is, what do you feel as though gets in the way of assuring that we are able to provide support for our educators, like knowing, hearing, you mentioned the listening sessions you have as an educator, you know firsthand, as a principal, you get a chance to sit down with those who you serve. What do you feel like gets in the way? Do you feel like it's systematic, meaning like district is unable to set X, Y, and Z up to provide that support versus just pushing it over to an EAP type of response? Or do you feel as though that there is a lack of prioritizing humanity? Because I know that came up a lot, and I do believe that that is critical. This year, I had opportunity to lead a district-wide PD, but it was focused on health and wellness. And so we leveraged MOUs, that community component that you mentioned, physical health, mental health, all those things were considered. You had everything from Zumba to yoga to grief counseling and components such as that nature. So that's my question for you all. If humanity is a priority, as we believe that it is for those who are serving our students who deserve our best, what do you feel as though gets in the way of us supporting our educators who are just as deserving?
I think, like, looking at a broader picture, some folks still don't think it matters. Like, that's the soft skills of being able to communicate and empathize with someone. And I don't like to use that word because it's a human skill. And I think that I've been fortunate to be in a district that has had pretty consistent, our superintendent was there for like 2 decades. He left, and then we're on our third in a couple years, but it's not related to that. It was something happened, but we have a lot of institutional knowledge in the district, and they've prioritized that. We haven't been able to with money, but I think that we've been able to see, like, these are things that are important. Our Portrait of the Graduate talks about what you should be when you leave our school and our district. And I think that we've been trying to do that. I think that it gets kind of the bigger picture of parents and, well, did they make the honor roll? Which go back to, can we talk about grading that's a whole forum? A lot of thoughts on that one. But this idea of what the community and the larger public see as the purpose of education versus what we all know our power in education. And it is multi-faceted. And I think that it stops us when folks aren't seeing all the things that you were, like, how many different, we have a lot of food insecure. We're handing out food and the Chromebooks and, I'm going to, the contact tracing. Like, they don't understand all the things that go into it. And I think that's the piece where, like, I remember getting told, well, I hope you get COVID, because I made a mistake on the day that the child could come back. I was like, have a nice day. I can't wait to see your child tomorrow. But I think that piece of like maybe a broader community not understanding it.
I think it's also time, not having structures in place, not making it a priority in some cases where it's literally a priority. So, like, built into your strategic plan, into your site's action plan, to evaluations of your employees even. So in my district, we just reimagined our strategic plan, and we actually built in wellness into some of the components. And now it's part of all of mine and my cabinet and my principals' evaluations about how are we addressing that. We do have, I agree with, surveys are always interesting, but we do have now an annual survey called Your Voice Matters that we're getting some questions on, so we can use that data, and then that data informs the site action plans that our principals do for their schools and our department action plans. So sometimes it's just actually, we talk about it, but then how do you actually have structures and accountability and time that's dedicated to that? Because what gets monitored gets done, and what gets talked about gets done. And even though we all care about it, caring about it is not enough if you don't have a system to really check it and monitor and understand it.
Echoing the comment on time, my high school has about 250 teachers, and this is something that we have collectively discussed at length of something we need to provide space and time for school staff to just literally come to a room and like just talk to someone. Just as we do for our students who are having a bad day, we are also human. And if we can find an affinity space where we can collectively build our morale together and understand that we are not alone in the stressors of the school environment, that is a great approach. I'm kind of curious to hear about those explicit strategies as it has developed in my school environment. Although we provided the space, we did not provide the time. So teachers would actually have to take their prep time, which is like, wow. Like, yes, I understand that there's only so much time in the day, but to take the time that the only 40 minutes of my day that I can prepare for my students to go to an affinity space and have conversations. Thank you, but I'm sorry. I need to do work, and that's what keeps happening structurally in my school, at least.
I think I have the next question. Corey, I want to talk about your analysis because in my old age, I'm starting to look at graphs like yours through a different lens. You've done all the number crunching to get this aggregated generalizable trend line. And yeah, go back to it because it used to be I would look at that line and say, oh, okay, gee whiz, this is not a good thing. But now I look at that line and I think I think it was like over 3,000 schools data that's aggregated in that line, 160 some odd thousand teachers or something like that. Yeah. And I keep thinking there've got to be schools that do significantly better than that line, and there have got to be schools that do significantly worse than that line in order to create that line. And I'm trying to figure out, would it make sense? And because part of me is inspired by what Christy said and what Ralph said about their own schools, would it make sense to do outlier analysis, like find those 100 districts that really beat the odds in this analysis and sort of dig into what is different? What is it about their culture? What is it about their relationships? What is it about the things they do? Because when the question is asked how to do school differently, I think the answer lies not in this line, but in the people that have beaten this odds. Can you reflect on that? Is that a reasonable thing to try to pursue?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea for like a quantitative and qualitative going together. I think sometimes, one leads and one follows. In this case, I think a great follow-up on this would be to find schools that are doing better. Now, you have to be a little careful about chasing noise, and those folks that understand statistics understand that there's going to be some outliers just by chance. But, I think if there was a big enough group of outliers and you could identify some practices that they're using, that would be a great place to start. This is like in sports when they use analytics in the eye test to figure out who the good players are. Like, I feel like we do one or the other sometimes, but rarely both, and we aren't very thoughtful about it. So I think that's a good idea.
Hi, my name is Nikki Churchwell, and up until recently, I was at the U.S. Department of Education. And I really appreciate the panel structure we have here today, where we have researchers and practitioners side by side. And I'd like to ask a little bit more about this relationship, right? So for our practitioners, how do you access research? Where do you go? Where do you find it? What formats are useful for you or less useful for you? And for our researchers, when and how and where do you connect with practitioners? And are there avenues for that are more or less useful for you?
One thing, we have collaborative relationships with our local universities, like, for example, George Mason. They bring together superintendents and our staff to focus. We have something called a learning network, where we all meet with very specific topics. This year, we've been focusing on AI. We've been focusing on chronic absenteeism and navigating the political climate. And so bringing us together with some of the research that's happening at George Mason, as well a little bit of the research that's happening for some of the AI work at Virginia Tech, which are our local universities. So that's been one way of having consortiums where we're brought together and we're working closely with them. And that I find most effective because we're talking about real time and we're talking about issues that we're all facing. And then we also get to share with, so it's a combination of, because I get to learn from some of our, and my staff get to learn from some of the our colleagues and other surrounding school systems here in the local area. So we're learning from practitioner to practitioner, but also hearing some of the research and some of the best practices that are being shared with us from what's happening. And some of it is just ongoing. And then as a result of that, there's also been studies that they've come in and done with us. So it's kind of been a three-way benefit.
Similar to that, we also have a local university in town, and it's the one I went to for my doctorate. So in being in connection with that and like as a dissertation advisee, having them come in and do, I did the study in the school I was in 14 years ago, and like, working with them, but then also being active in like the National Association of Secondary School Principals. So they're sending out the news briefs, and that, of all of my smart briefs just went out of my head of who sends what, but I'm a voracious reader. So I'm just reading and I'm sending, or podcasts. I'm obsessed with outlier stuff. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a really cool podcast that was talking about outlier things. And so in just talking to other principals, my chief of schools, my direct supervisor, we're sharing things all the time. And then going out to conferences, and our Connecticut Association of Schools has a yearly conference, and going there and presenting, and then I love listening to other principals and other teachers. What are they doing? And it might not be something like extravagant, but it's like, oh yeah, I can do that. I'm going to bring it back. And just like learning from each other, but I would love to know a better way, if there's any other ways, because I think research is exciting, and I know if anybody has any suggestions, I'm open to them, because I love learning about it.
I was a little taken back by the question because personally, I love research. I'm in it. I dream about it. But I'm thinking about teachers at large in my school community, and where do they have access? Where's the opportunity? And the first exposure, I think, is those teacher preparation programs. So how are you connecting with those programs and ensuring that they are using best practices as they are preparing the future teachers? And then into that transition is, once you're a teacher in the school setting, all you really have for exposure, if you are not someone going out of your way to find it, is the professional development and the continued education. Outside of that, there's no real particular driver except for licensure requirements, and therefore taking those continued ed that would make you really dive into research literature.
I mean, we, at EPIC, at UNC, we tend to partner more with our state education agency than local districts, but that can vary. And part of that is also just sort of the methodological hat I wear as a quantitative researcher with access to state data. And so sometimes those questions of interest in the data that are paired with it, that state agency is sort of that key partner. I mean, I really think it's straightforward, but frequency of engagement, bidirectionality of engagement are just two critical things. I think it's important that researchers are able to bring ideas to state or local partners and actively listen, respond, think about what it means. And I think it's really important for state and local partners to be able to bring what they need to a researcher community. Sometimes there's resources, that are needed to then support that work, right? But I think it's really just important and centering around those relationships again, and having bidirectional communication.
And I guess I'll just quickly add, I think we're terrible at this. And I think a lot of folks in the room kind of understand that. Part of it is the groups aren't meant to talk to each other. We aren't really built very well a way to do that. I mean, the Department of Ed had the What Works Clearinghouse. Maybe still has it. I don't know. It's mostly been a failure, to be blunt. It just hasn't worked. I mean, it was a good concept, but that was supposed to convey research findings to the practitioner world. It's never really happened. I'm hearing you guys talk about teacher turnover, alt-cert programs. Researchers know a lot about that stuff, actually. But then I'm thinking there's no way we haven't communicated it. But the What Works Clearinghouse wouldn't work for that, because it's all just pure causal studies, or there's certain properties of alt-cert programs that lead to certain types of people entering, which could be really useful. There's no scope for that stuff to come out. So I don't know what the answer is, but we're pretty terrible at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Corey's point, a key thing, and it even came up yesterday in some of our restart things here the day before, is dissemination, effective dissemination from a research standpoint is really hard. And I don't think, at least speaking for myself, when we think about a project, we think about what we're going to do, our scope and everything else, that we really give the time and attention that deserves. So I would note that. That's a really hard thing to do well.
And I would just piggyback on what you said, Kevin. Yeah, we spent, for those of us who were at the core meeting yesterday, that's pretty much what we focused on yesterday, was dissemination and better engaging the world out there in terms of with research. And so I think we're out of time. Yeah.
Yes.
But I just wanted to, again, thank you so much to our panelists, to our presenters, to the wonderful questions from the audience, and also to Restart, of course, for having us here. So thanks again to everybody.
Yes, thank you. What a wonderful panel. Thank you all so much.